Welcome to this episode of the Great Lives series. Today, we're going to look at the story of Lionel Messi. At 11 years old, doctors told his family he had a rare growth hormone deficiency, a condition that would require years of expensive treatment his own boyhood club in Argentina couldn't fully afford to fund. A rival club on another continent offered to pay for his medicine instead, on the strength of a deal reportedly first agreed on the back of a paper napkin because nobody wanted to risk losing him while the formal paperwork was still being drawn up. That small, undersized boy from Rosario grew up to become, by the consensus of most of the sport's greatest players and coaches, the finest footballer who has ever lived. This is the story of Lionel Messi, the boy medicine almost priced out of the game, who went on to redefine it entirely. Lionel Andres Messi was born on the 24th of June 1987 in Rosario, Argentina, into a football-loving family, and began playing the sport almost as soon as he could walk, joining the youth ranks of his local club, Newell's Old Boys, as a small child already showing unusual technical ability with the ball at his feet. Around the age of 10 or 11, Messi was diagnosed with a growth hormone deficiency, a medical condition that would keep him significantly smaller than his peers without ongoing treatment. Treatment that ran to several $100s a month, a cost Newell's Old Boys initially covered but could not sustain indefinitely as the family's own means grew increasingly stretched. Word of the small, exceptionally talented Argentine boy reached FC Barcelona, and in 2000, the family traveled to Spain for a trial that reportedly left the club's youth coaches stunned within minutes of watching him play. Barcelona's technical staff were convinced almost immediately that they were watching something rare. But the club's own bureaucracy moved slowly through the formal paperwork required to register a foreign minor. And with the family growing anxious about competing offers from other clubs and the ticking clock on Messi's medical treatment back home, the club's sporting director at the time, Carlos Rexar, is said to have insisted on writing down a binding agreement to sign the boy on the spot, using the only paper available in the room, a paper napkin. That napkin, later verified by those present and eventually sold at auction decades afterward for a substantial sum, became one of the most famous informal contracts in the history of professional sport. Barcelona agreed to cover the full cost of Messi's ongoing medical treatment and relocated the entire family to Spain to make it possible. And in 2001, at 13 years old, Messi joined the club's famed youth academy, known as La Masia, leaving behind everything familiar in Rosario for a country where he barely knew anyone at all. Messi progressed rapidly through Barcelona's youth system, and in 2004, still only 16 years old, made his debut for the senior first team, becoming one of the youngest players ever to do so in the club's long history. What followed over the next 17 years was one of the most statistically dominant individual careers the sport has ever recorded. Messi became Barcelona's all-time leading goalscorer by a considerable margin, won numerous La Liga titles and multiple UEFA Champions League trophies with the club, and claimed the Ballon d'Or, football's most prestigious individual award for the world's best player, a record 8 times across his career, more than any other player in the award's history, edging out his great career-long rival, Cristiano Ronaldo. In debate over the sport's greatest ever player that dominated football discussion for the better part of 2 decades and rarely reached any settled conclusion among fans or pundits. Messi's game was built on qualities that seemed almost contradictory in a sport increasingly dominated by size, speed, and raw physical power. Extraordinary close control at low speed, an ability to change direction instantly while surrounded by defenders far larger and stronger than himself, and a footballing intelligence that let him consistently find space and openings that simply weren't visible to anyone else on the pitch, teammates included. He built his entire game, from childhood onward, around his left foot and his low center of gravity. Precisely the physical traits that had once seemed like a liability tied to his medical condition, and turned him, through relentless practice, into the foundation of the most decorated individual career in the sport's history. A rare case of a childhood limitation becoming a defining professional strength rather than an obstacle to overcome. In 2021, Messi's remarkable run at Barcelona ended in circumstances few had predicted. Despite both player and club reportedly wanting to continue together, Barcelona's severe financial difficulties, compounded by strict Spanish league financial regulations limiting how much the club could spend on player wages, made it impossible for the club to legally register a new contract for him. Messi departed Barcelona in tears at an emotional press conference, ending a relationship that had defined both his career and the club's modern identity for the better part of 2 decades, and joined Paris Saint-Germain in France later that same year. His 2 seasons in Paris produced domestic league success, but never quite replicated the singular, transcendent dominance of his Barcelona years. And in the background, one significant gap remained conspicuously present on his otherwise unmatched resume: a World Cup title with his native Argentina, a prize that had eluded him through several previous painful tournament near misses, including a final defeat in 2014. That gap closed in dramatic, almost cinematic fashion in December 2022, when Messi captained Argentina to victory at the World Cup in Qatar, culminating in a final against France widely regarded as one of the single greatest matches in the tournament's entire history, a seesawing contest decided only after extra time and a tense penalty shootout. Messi was named the tournament's best player, finally answering the one remaining criticism that had followed even his extraordinary career for years. That individual brilliance alone had never been enough to deliver football's ultimate team prize for his own country. In 2023, Messi made a move that surprised much of the football world, joining Inter Miami in the United States Major League Soccer competition, a league that had never before hosted a player of his stature at the peak of his fame. His arrival transformed the league's global profile almost overnight, filling stadiums to capacity across the country and drawing an entirely new international audience to American soccer, while Messi himself continued winning trophies and producing performances that defied his advancing age. Away from the pitch, Messi has generally maintained a notably private, low-key personal life relative to many of his contemporaries in global sport, avoiding much of the off-field controversy that has followed other athletes of comparable fame, and remains married to his childhood friend from Rosario, Antonella Rocuzzo, whom he has known since they were young children in the same neighborhood, with whom he has 3 sons. His career has not been entirely free of controversy off the field either. In 2016, Messi and his father were both given suspended prison sentences in Spain after being convicted of tax fraud related to undeclared income from his image rights, a case that concluded with substantial fines rather than actual imprisonment, but which remains part of the honest historical record of his career alongside its extraordinary sporting achievements. Lionel Messi's story, in the end, traces back to that single, improbable detail from his childhood: a small boy whose body worked against him, saved by a club willing to bet everything on a talent it could see even before the paperwork existed to make it official. Nearly a quarter of a century later, he remains, by the estimation of much of the football world, not simply one of the greatest players the sport has ever produced, but quite possibly the greatest it will ever see. If this story moved you, do 2 quick things before you go. Hit like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episode of the Great Lives series.